Hello, it's Saturday the 22nd of June 2019 and in the background you can see a very large building. That in fact is the headquarters for Tusla in Kilmainham in Dublin, just a stone throw from Euston Station. And the reason why I'm coming to you this afternoon live is to let you know that inside in that building there is a lady and a small group of people occupying that building since yesterday. It's not a story that's going to be carried by mainstream media, but it's a story that I think it's important to get out there. Angela Ray is from Carlow and she has waged a battle now for almost 5 years to be reunited with her son. And she waged that battle with Tusla quietly, and last year when she felt she was getting no place, she took to social media to highlight her story, express her anger and her frustration. By doing that, she actually broke the in-camera rule that pertains in the family law courts, where you must not speak about what happens inside the court. She was jailed, and after that she continued to speak out on social media, and the little bit of supervised access that she had to her son was cut off completely. Now, I have shared some information on Angela's story from time to time. I've been talking to Angela a couple of times today. The Gardaí were there yesterday. They were called in by Tusla. They spoke with Angela and the people that were supporting her, and they left. Angela is demanding that she get to hand a letter to one of three people. They are Pat Rabbit, who is the current chairperson of Tusla, Pat Smith, who is the interim CEO of Tusla, or Pat Osborne, who is the manager for quality control, who deals with complaints. Her efforts yesterday to meet with one of those three Pats actually failed, and she is resolute that she is not leaving the building until she gets to meet with one of them. A standoff has ensued. She has been here overnight with some of her supporters. No food or water is allowed into the building, so they haven't eaten since 12 noon yesterday. That was the last time that they had something to eat. The small supply of water that they took into the building with them has now run out, and they have to resort to water from the toilets. She's in very good spirits, and she has been at pains to point out to me that this is not about her, that this is also a fight on behalf of all of the other mothers and fathers around Ireland who have been denied access to their children by Tusla. I suppose I first got involved with covering the issue of Tusla last September. To be perfectly honest about it, I'd never really heard of Tusla until I was contacted by a Polish lady, and her story was actually covered in mainstream television in Poland, the equivalent to our Primetime Investigates. And her story involves her not being able to see her son, whom she believes to be a victim of child sex abuse. I did a video on that went viral, and after that I was contacted by several mothers. Now, before I move on to that, I want to say that I was in very regular contact with that Polish lady up until Christmas, and she has now disappeared. I don't know if she has returned to Poland and is living undercover there, or if she's living undercover in Ireland. All I can say is that the small number of people in the Polish community that I am in contact with, that were in contact with her, haven't seen her either. So just put that on the record. So getting back to the mothers that contacted me, a pattern began to emerge. there were three broad headings under which the mothers belonged. Number one, women who grew up in the care system themselves, many of them victims of sex abuse in foster care. These mothers were known to social workers and their children were taken from them. The second group of mothers were women through no fault of their own who had become homeless, and the Tusla stepped in and took their children. And really worryingly, a third group of mothers were women who were victims of domestic violence, and they had barring orders in place, but the barring orders were being continually broken, and Tusla stepped in and removed the children because they said that they feared for the safety of the children. So you now have a situation where the mother is still at risk from the perpetrator of the violence, and she's now alienated from her children. There was a subgroup also, and I would call them middle class women, for want of a better title. These were women married to very influential men who discovered that their children were being sexually abused by their husbands. And once they alerted the authorities, the Tusla stepped in, the family law court stepped in, the full custody was given to the father, and if the mother didn't kick up a fuss, she's allowed to see the child under supervision once a week. If she created any kind of a fuss whatsoever, she is denied all access to the children. Now, the interesting thing about it is this, that no matter where these women were living in the country, the court case ended up in Dublin, which is very unusual. And the same small number of legal people represented these men. So that's all that I can actually say about that at the moment. I attended the Safe Ireland conference in November, and at that conference I met with Frances Fitzgerald, and I told her what was happening, and she was extremely nice, and she said that she would meet with me and a small number of mothers. And I got together a group of mothers and we met with her in the Dáil. Now, she said that she was not allowed to hear individual cases. So we framed the narrative in such a way that we didn't deal with individual cases, but we gave her a broad outline of what was happening. In the weeks that followed that meeting, there were stumbling blocks, one after another, put in my way, so that absolutely nothing came of that meeting, and I just ended up abandoning it in sheer frustration because I was going no place. Moving on then to February, I watched Pat Rabbitte, who is the newly appointed chairperson of Tusla, appear before the Oireachtas Children and Youth Affairs Committee in the Dáil. And I watched it in full, and the only deputy present at that meeting that challenged Pat Rabbitte was in fact Deputy Anne Rabbitte from County Galway, who is the Fianna Fáil spokesperson on Children and Youth Affairs. So I emailed her and was very surprised that she got back to me immediately, and she said that she would meet with a group of mothers. So we headed back up to the Dáil again with a group of mothers, and I have to say it was a completely different type of meeting. No note taking whatsoever, very informal, and she wanted to hear the women's stories. And then she said that she couldn't deal with individual cases, and she more or less said to me that if I could organise the women into a group, then she would be able to advocate for the group. And that's exactly what has happened. Last Saturday we had a meeting in Athlone of mothers from all over Ireland whose children have been taken from them. And the women formed a group. They've called it ABC, the Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice. Deputy Anne Rabbitte was present at that meeting, and she says that while we were organising the meeting, it took a number of weeks to organise, back in the Dáil she was networking with other deputies, cross-party, not confined to any individual party, but she was networking with other deputies in the Dáil who are sympathetic to this whole issue. And she has said that on her end she will work with those deputies to advocate for this group and for all parents who are having difficulties with Tusla. I think it's important for me just to tell you a little bit about Tusla and how it came about. Up until 2014, the old health boards amalgamated into the HSE, and there was no specific department within the HSE dealing exclusively with children. And there were a number of very high profile tragic cases involving the failure of social workers to prevent the deaths of children in care. These stories have actually been written into the Dáil records. And if you follow me on Facebook, you'll know that I recently did an interview with Maura, a retired social worker who was on the front line in Dublin at that time and knew those cases intimately. Alan Shatter, who was in Fine Gael at the time, and Fine Gael were in opposition, was very concerned about what was happening to these children. And so Fine Gael formed a committee, and Maura was part of that committee. And they issued a report, and one of the recommendations was that an agency be set up exclusively for the protection of children. In 2011, Fine Gael were elected to government, and in 2014 Frances Fitzgerald, Minister for Children, announced the setting up of Tusla. Now, the unfortunate thing is that the social workers involved in, I suppose, for the want of a better word, they were guilty of professional incompetence. They were moved into Tusla, excuse me. But not alone that, I've been told that government departments, various government departments, used the setting up of Tusla in 2014 as a means of ridding their departments of incompetent civil servants. So they were all pushed over to Tusla. And what you have now is an organisation that is grossly incompetent and not fit for purpose. And I'm not just saying that. Without going into the details of it, this is what came out in the Charlton Tribunal report, which dealt with an investigation how Tusla dealt with false sex allegations against Maurice McCabe. We have the situation of Grace, the child who was in foster care, who was systematically raped, and the social workers knew what was happening and nothing was done about it. And those social workers, it's on the record, those social workers are now working in Tusla. And most recently, in the last number of weeks, we've had that horrendous case over in Galway of the children that were in foster care. And the social workers were aware that the children were being sexually abused and raped by a number of people. Sorry, in that particular case, it was the son of the parents that had fostered the children, and he ended up being jailed for that. But Tusla were aware of what was going on, and they did nothing. So when I started reporting on this in last September, I'd never used Facebook Live in my life and knew nothing about it, just a mother. I had just retired. I approached journalists about this, and they told me that they could not touch any of these stories because of the in-camera rule, that if they reported on these cases that they were in danger of being fined to up to €50,000 or a 3-year jail sentence or both. So you will not get anybody in mainstream media report on what's going on. So the little red hen, I'm from the country, little red hen, if you can't get something to do something, you do it yourself. And so for that reason, I took to social media to start highlighting what is going on. And I suppose that is effectively why I'm here today, because I think you need to know what's going on. Now, when Tusla was set up in 2014, Fred McBride was appointed as CEO. Fred McBride had been head of child services in Dundee, and when he was in that position, a child called Brandon Muir, known to social services of which he was head, was enduring horrendous treatment. It was reported to social services by the child's grandmother several times. The child ended up being horrifically murdered. The investigation that ensued was scathing in its criticism of Fred McBride. Now, all that is out there in the public domain, reported on by reputable papers. So I'm not making this story up. So Brandon Muir suffered a horrendous death, and Fred McBride was the head of social services in Dundee when that happened. And he makes his way to Ireland, and within a short couple of years, he's actually head of Tusla. He remained the head of Tusla until 30th of August last year. There is no head of Tusla at the moment. A man called Pat Smith, whose background is in accounts, is the intern. And Pat Rabbit was questioned that day in February when he appeared before the Oireachtas Children and Youth Affairs Committee as to when the new CEO of Tusla was going to be appointed. And he wasn't able to give a definitive answer. That day he also said that there were more social workers leaving Tusla than they were able to recruit, that there is a massive difficulty with recruiting social workers. So the number of social workers within Tusla is actually going down. Another way of knowing that people within the system are actually getting out of it, and they're having difficulty recruiting social workers to work within it. I don't even know where I'm going to begin with this. I began to do a little bit of digging, and I found Deputy Claire Daly to be absolutely invaluable. I began handing over the questions to her. She would pass them on to Catherine Sapone, and then we would get answers. And it is amazing the information that we have been able to get that way in the last couple of months. For example, Catherine Sapone stated that €6,000 a week was being paid for children that are put into residential care. I was tipped off by somebody, and the information was passed on to Catherine Sapone, and she went back into the Dáil, or she supplied another written reply, and she admitted that €13,000 a week is what is being paid. Now, what was not said is that up to €58,000 a week is paid by Tusla to some of these private residential homes that are accommodating children. It's absolutely horrendous. There are Irish children in a mental hospital in England, in Northumbria, St Andrews, and a recent inspection of that hospital and that facility described horrendous abuses of children in that facility and said that it was unsafe for children. And if you scroll down through my news feed, you'll see the reply that Catherine Sapone gave to that when Claire Daly put it to her recently, and she replied this week. I have come to realise that a massive industry has now been established that needs children to be fed into it. The budget for Tusla this year is a little under €1 billion. But when Tusla was set up in 2014, it was set up as a public-private partnership. So in addition to the funding that it is getting from the state, Tusla is also in receipt of funding from private individuals and private companies. And I've recently sent on questions to Clare Daly to ask Catherine Zappona, and I'm waiting on a reply. Who are the private individuals and the companies that are currently funding Tusla? And what I'd like to know is, what is their agenda? Now, it has become a massive industry and it needs children to be fed into it. I'll just give you some of the scams that are operating. Social workers and managers of the HSE retire and they become what's known as GALs, G-A-L, and it's the Latin for something or other, but basically it means the voice of the child. They say that they're independent of Tusla, but in a question, in reply to a question that was asked of Catherine Zappona, she admitted that they're paid for by Tusla. So how can they be independent of Tusla if they're paid for by Tusla? And the rate for them is €125 an hour. Now, you're hearing me correctly. Their rate is €125 an hour. And it's not for the day that they spend hanging around in court, but they also get paid for the time that it takes to meet with the family, to write up reports, follow up meetings, and you have it, and they're on a gravy train. Hello again. This is a live broadcast from outside Tusla headquarters in Kilmainham in Dublin, just a short walk across from Houston Station. I was broadcasting live and it got disrupted. So for those of you who are joining me for the first time, the reason why I'm here is to report on an occupation of this building by a lady called Angela Ray from Carlow. She and a number of her supporters moved in yesterday and asked to speak with Pat Rabbitt, who is the chairperson of Tusla, or the interim CEO, who's Pat Smith, or Pat Osborne, who is the manager of the manager of quality and the manager of quality assurance, and he's the person responsible for dealing with complaints. And she said that she was not leaving until she got to meet with them. And of course, a standoff ensued. The guards were called. The guards didn't see that there was any crime being committed, and they left. Angela and her supporters defied orders from Tusla to vacate the building at 5 o'clock, and they have remained there overnight, and they're still in there. They have had no food since 12 noon yesterday. The small drop of water that they brought in with them is now gone, and they have to resort to drinking water from the taps in the washrooms. Angela, I suppose those of you who are not familiar with her story, fought a 4-year battle with Tusla to be reunited with her son. And I'm not going to go into the details of her case. She then took to social media as a last resort, which led to her breaking the family court in-camera rule, and Angela was jailed last year. She continued to tell her story and to campaign on social media, and I suppose this is the latest action that she has taken in order to begin a process whereby she can be reunited with her son. And I have spoken to her today. She said this is not about her, it's also about all the other parents around Ireland, particularly mothers whose children have been taken from them by Tusla, and they can no longer, a lot of them can no longer even see their children. I gave a very lengthy background into the setting up of Tusla and the people involved in my last news feed. So I'm going to continue on where I left off, and I was speaking about the fact that a massive system now has been built which depends on children being fed into the system in order for it to survive. And there's massive amounts of money being made out of these families that have had their children taken. And I was speaking about the gals, €125 an hour, and that's in my last feed, and you know, maybe you might just like to go and have a listen to that. The mothers that I have been talking to speak about what happens in the family law courts. They find that if they are represented by a solicitor from Free Legal Aid, that the solicitor actually goes along with the system, and in many instances actually works against them. If they go in on their own, the judge has a very dim view of a lay litigant, and they can find themselves in court. One mother spoke to me last week who was in court, and she found herself on her own. There were 2 social workers from Tusla. Each of those social workers was represented by a solicitor. Tusla itself was represented by a barrister. There was a gal, and the gal was represented by a barrister. So it's a crazy system, and she was not allowed to speak. She was shouted down any time that she tried to speak. So the family law courts are actually dysfunctional. I want to speak a little bit about the role of the Gardaí in all of this. I think that we're just having somebody just to be aware we're live on Facebook. I'm having a Gay Byrne moment. Do you remember that one with Mike Murphy and Gay Byrne? So, yeah. So where was I? Yes, the role of the Gardaí in all of this. Jeffrey Shannon is the leading expert on family law in this country, and he's also the raconteur for children, and he has written a number of reports, and I'll actually post one of them later on this evening. A report he wrote following a study that he did on the role of the Gardaí in relation to child protection, and this report was published in 2017, and he really commended the Gardaí. First of all, they receive no training in how to deal with family law issues and children. In the course of their work, they go into situations where they can see clearly that children are at risk. They do have powers under the law to remove the children from that situation for their own safety. But they actually have no place to bring the children. The only place they can bring the children is to the Garda station, or in some cases they might decide to bring the children to a local hospital. In his report, he describes how a guard will then sit with the children, and the children are obviously very traumatised. Usually this happens at night or at the weekend, and at night or the weekend there is no social worker from Tusla on duty. So a private company has to be phoned for a social worker from the private company to come down to the station. That could take several hours. And he saw cases documented where Gardaí will sit with those children even though it's way past their finishing time, because they don't want to leave the children. They've built up a relationship with the children in the intervening hours, and they have reassured them and they have calmed them. and they sit with the children until the children are handed over to the social worker. But it's actually illegal for the guards to hand over those children to a social worker from a private company, because the law states that the children can only be handed over to a social worker from Tusla. It's a very, very extensive report that runs to way over 300 pages, and I managed to get through a good deal of it. And basically, the outcome of that report is that the Gardaí are actually doing a very good job under extremely difficult circumstances. When the children are handed over to the social workers, there is never a follow-up with the Gardaí to tell them where the children went. And the only way that the children may come to their notice again is maybe in 6 months or a year's time, and they're called out to the same house again and they find the children in the same situation. The HICWA have published several reports in the last year that are highly critical of Tusla. One of the criticisms that they have of Tusla is that the foster families where Tusla place children for foster care, quite a number of them are not actually Garda vetted. I won't go into all of the details. I have written about this extensively over the last number of months. Suffice to say that HICWA have published a number of reports highly critical of Tusla. Last year, the UN rapporteur for children who are being sold and sexually abused. Her name is Maud, and now it's a difficult name, I'll try and pronounce it properly. Maud de Bouwer Bouquet came to Ireland for a week last year with a team of people, and they spoke to all of the stakeholders, and they also went through a lot of documentation and records. And a couple of months ago she published her report, and it was scathing of Tusla, particularly the whole area where children who are being sexually abused systematically are not being protected. And I wrote about that at the time. There's only one unit in the entire country that's specialised to deal with and examine children who have been sexually abused, and it's in Galway. And sometimes it can be a month to 2 months before the children arrive for examination in that unit. I won't go into all of the details of that right now, but it's out there for the record. So, Tusla is completely, totally and utterly dysfunctional. And I have described in my first live feed how it came about and who's been running it. And a lot of the people that are in it are actually not fit for purpose. So you have the incompetent who are actually protecting the incapable. Now I'll repeat that. The incompetent protecting the incapable, and that's what you have in Tusla. I am, I suppose, a little bit concerned that this issue with Tusla and mothers could actually be hijacked by individuals for their own political purposes, and I would not like to see that happening. I have been working with the mothers now since last September, and we have a group in place, and we have a number of Dáil deputies who are prepared to work with us. And at the end of the day, I am a Democrat, and I believe in the democratic system. And I also know that there are other groups out there that are in existence a much longer period. We only came into existence last Saturday. But I know that there are other groups out there who have built up a wealth of evidence over many, many years. And I believe that those groups need to be consulted with as well by the Dáil deputies when it comes to building up a case against Tusla. So, I have been really, really long-winded here. Just a few things that I want to say. I've done a live feed over in Tullamore last night and the night before with Michelle, a mother of 7 children, and her husband, who are currently living in a cabin. And I suppose her battle with Offaly County Council going back for the last year to try and get a house and get accommodation. Interestingly enough, a social worker from Tusla intervened yesterday, and when I heard that Tusla were getting involved, my heart sank, and I said, oh my God, the children are going to be taken off this family. But in actual fact, quite the opposite happened. And if you watch my live feed with Michelle last night, she actually read out the letter that the social worker wrote to Offaly County Council yesterday, advocating on behalf of the family. And do you know what? That actually gives me fantastic heart, because this is a young social worker, not long out of college. And it is just so fantastic to think that there are social workers. And the mothers that I'm talking to are telling me there's some fantastic social workers out there. There's absolutely some amazing social workers out there. But unfortunately, it's the bad apples that are ruling the roost. And I wouldn't call them bad apples. They're just completely, totally and utterly incompetent. And I explained in my live feed last night, the reason why Ireland is in the mess that it's in now is that right throughout the public service, that people have been hired because of cronyism and nepotism. It's not what you know that gets you a job in the public service, it's who you know, and that's replicated right across the public service. So you have people now in positions and they're incapable of doing the job that they're employed to do. So all we need to do is to start recruiting people who are qualified to do what they're supposed to do. I really do passionately believe that we can change this system. The other thing that needs to happen is that the walls of silence needs to come down. The in-camera rule in the family law courts was never meant to be exercised in the way that it has been exercised. And it's very arbitrary. And what I'm finding is that what is allowed in one district court is not allowed in the next. For example, one judge will be very sympathetic and he will allow a Mackenzie friend into the court to accompany the mother. In another court, it's not allowed to happen. So I think journalists should be allowed to come in. They don't have to name anybody, but they need to be able to report on what's going on, because what's done in secret is wrong. The in-camera rule in the family law courts has to be reformed. I can understand why it has to be there to protect the identity of people at a difficult time in their life. But the public shouldn't be allowed into the court, and there should be designated journalists who are allowed to report on what's actually happening. The other situation is that report after report after report is being compiled, but they're going no place. They're actually gathering dust on the shelf. The blueprint for what we need to do is already written there. So if Catherine Sapone or Leo Varadkar want to know the direction that they have to head in, all they need to do is to open up the reports by people like Jeffrey Shanahan and read the recommendations, and the answers are there. So all the problems have been documented and all the recommendations have been made. It's just a matter now of actually implementing them. So what can you do to help? Well, it's the power of social media. Mainstream media are not going to do this story. It's only one woman occupying an office in Tusla. So they will consider it, and maybe somebody like the Journal or Joe.ie or somebody like that will pick up on this story and get it out there. If not, we're relying on social media, and this is where you come in. By sharing this video, you will get the story out to a much wider audience. Now, I have been broadcasting on Facebook up until now, but it's a very limited audience, and I'm aware of that. So with that in mind, I'm after setting up a YouTube channel, and I need 1,000 people to subscribe to that channel first before I can actually broadcast live on it, and it's a much better platform. So I'd really appreciate if you would just look at the little video that I put up this morning. It's I suppose you'd call it a little trailer or whatever, that gives you all the details, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And it's not that I want to be getting out there. No, it's all of us together getting these stories out for these women that have no voice, that we can be the voice for the voiceless. And the more we can make people aware of what is actually happening, the greater the chance then of the politicians being pushed to do what is right. Now, you don't have to, there's no, I deliberately did this, there's no such thing as having to pay, or it doesn't involve money. I do what I do completely at my own cost, and Deirdre does too. We give of our time, and we pay for our diesel to get here and whatever, and we do this. We do this to get the story out there. We don't have any hidden agenda. I'm not pushing this for any political reasons, and I'm not doing it for the money. Why I'm doing it is that I'm a mother. I'm actually a mother, and there is no greater bond on this earth than the bond between a mother and her child. And the pain that a mother goes through when their children is taken from them is absolutely horrendous. It's absolutely horrific. So that's why I'm doing it. I am so incredibly fortunate that I was able to go through my life without this ever happening to me. And I feel that I have a duty to reach out and help mothers who have found themselves in this situation. And I know that you feel the same way as I do. And how do I know that? Because over the last number of months you have been following my page, and you have been commenting, and you've been sharing. So you have the same vision as myself. So we're all in this together. I just happen to be the person in front of the camera. That's what I'm doing. And Deirdre is the person behind the camera making all this happen. And we're all in this together. So she's giving me a thumbs up. Thank you. Thank you for watching. If you've just joined, I'm live here outside Tusla headquarters in Kilmainham in Dublin, which is just across the road from Houston Station, where it is currently being occupied by Angela Ray and a number of people. And Angela is doing this, I suppose, as the next step in what she thinks is the right strategy to be reunited with her son. Everything else that she has done over the last 5 years has failed. So this is what she is doing, and I'm just here to report on it. If you're watching, Angela, Angela, I've met you a few times. It's just really, really a privilege to know you. You are such a warm-hearted, lovely, lovely, lovely woman. And I've spoken to your mother and father as well. Really, really lovely people. And in spite of everything, you haven't lost the faith, and you're still able to keep a smile on your face. And your rendition of the song last night was absolutely beautiful. And so you can, I'm heading back to Longford now, and so if you want updates on what's happening, just go onto Angela's page. She's going to be giving regular updates on what's happening. So it looks like they're here for the long haul. She's effectively on an enforced hunger strike, She hasn't eaten since noon yesterday, and there is no way that she can, the security guards on duty will allow food into the building, and they're absolutely starving. So we leave it at that. Thanks for watching, and please share.